Hello, Andres. Very nice to meet
Hello,
you again.
Marcus. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, I was a guest on your Talking Brains show on YouTube, which is not yet a
Yep.
podcast. We really need to do that.
It will become a podcast this year.
And
Yes.
so you're a neuroscientist, and what do you do?
Well, that's a good question. I basically let's say try to understand how experience happens. That's as simple as that. How is it possible that when we open our eyes in the morning and when we close our eyes in the night, there is stuff going on that we see, that we hear, that we touch, and those things that happen around us actually have a quality.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say they have sentience. We can describe them in a way that is extremely close to us, and at the same time is the most real thing ever. Experience is the only thing that we can call real
Mm-hmm.
in this world of smokes and mirrors that we live in. So I try to do that in a very, you could say, naive way, which is trying to look at what's going on inside the skull. So
Mm-hmm.
I use tools from neuroscience to understand how consciousness, in particular, works. Yeah, so that's what I do.
Wow. So you said like the only thing that's real is our experiences, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, that's a good one.
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, can you doubt about your own experience? Not about the things that you see, not about the content of your experience, but about the fact that you are aware.
Mhm.
The fact that when you are actually making a description, even though that description might end up being true or false, the faculty by which you're making that description is through your awareness. So can you doubt about your own awareness? I wouldn't say so. So the starting point of this neuroscience of consciousness, if you want, it's the claim that experience is real,
Mhm.
and later on you try to understand what are the causes of that experience, or not the causes if you want, but what is the relationship of that lived experience and some activity in your body, in this case, or in my case, some activity in your own brain.
Mhm.
But doubting about that starting point, I would say it's a mistake. And I'm aware of the fact that there are going to be many philosophers or even colleagues that might say, no, wait a second, what are you saying? We can also doubt about the fact that you're aware, but from a purely consciousness research point of view, I would say that if you doubt that, then you doubt the object of your own investigation, which I think is it would be a terrible mistake to make.
Mhm. Yeah, it kind of like you. I would believe that you have to assume that consciousness is not something where you have a judgmental definition of it, but where it is. I don't know how to describe it, but if you're thinking about, say, a cow um, standing in a field chewing grass,
I'm thinking about
yeah,
that.
and there is because there because you were already using the word like outside of us and stuff like that. So really, like there's some sort of exchange of information via our senses going inside and somewhat going outside. And so the cow in the field and its level of consciousness or experiencing, right, is ultimately no different from Andres in his apartment, right?
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. So that's a very good distinction, because we try to make the distinction between what we call the contents of the mind, or the contents of consciousness, which is basically objects in your mind,
Mm-hmm.
cows, grass, discussions with Marcus Reuter, etc., and the faculty by which you become aware of those objects. I'm using the word faculty in a very loose manner, but basically the spotlight, the light that illuminates those objects in your mind. And that light that illuminates those objects in your mind is not a thing in itself. It's the condition of possibility by which you become aware of those things. So that, I think the metaphor of the light is really good, because light is the condition of possibility by which you are capable of experiencing anything outside. So without light, there wouldn't be objects in the world, because light couldn't be able to reflect out of those objects, and you wouldn't be aware of them. So, but at the same time, light in this metaphor is not a thing. Like awareness is not a thing. It's a constant process by which all other things exist. So on that note, that's why I think consciousness is such a hard subject to study, because it's never the object.
And it's not, it's not even the light, if using
exactly.
it, but it's the direction of the light.
Exactly. It's not even the light. The light is a metaphor because, again, you can say, yeah, light, of course, in some way is still an object, because you can describe it and measure it. It's a wave and it's a particle at the same time, so it's a function, if you want. But awareness is a very, very special thing, because it's always present, and at the same time, it's never fixed. It's always changing. So how on earth can you make a science out of something that is ever present and it's always changing at the same time? It's really hard. If you think about how science works, like if you think how calculus works, so for instance, you need to maintain one of the parameters or of the variables fixed in the equation and move the other in such a way to study velocity or acceleration or whatever. And then if you want to study the other variable, let's say y, you need to fix x and see how y moves now. But you always need to maintain one fixed in order to study how the other one changes. But what happens with consciousness? It's always changing. From a first person point of view, it's always changing. So how you can make science of something that is so, apparently transient, and so close to you, right? You cannot make a separation between you and your awareness. You can always make separations between you and the objects of your awareness. Let's say your thoughts, objects outside, your dreams. But what about the awareness itself?
So have you found any answers to this question? How to study?
Partial. Exactly. So how do we do that? So I would say that there are a few approaches for this. One of them that is very popular is literally to forget about what I just said and just try, first of all, to understand what happens with the consciousnesses of other people, right? So I don't care anymore about my own awareness, but I do care about whether or not someone is conscious or not, or if someone is awake or not, or if someone is asleep or not. So we can study what people called states of consciousness, which are differences between different levels of awareness, but in others, not on myself, in others. And the most promising way of studying those differences in states of consciousness is by investigating, for instance, what happens in the brain of someone when he or she is asleep, or when they are awake, or when they are under hypnosis, or when they are under the effects of some drug, or when they are incapable of communicating anything, when they're in a pathological state of consciousness, as we call them, like comatose or vegetative, etc. And then we can record what's happening in their brains, and we can compare the different states. And we can do that with our fancy tools and fancy toys that we play with. But at the end of the day, the question is, what are the differences between these different states? in such a way that we could find some common principle that explains why some people become aware when they open their eyes in the morning and why they're not aware even though they can follow simple instructions in a hospital when they're in a, let's say, minimally conscious state.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the state's approach.
Okay.
And that has been very promising, I would say, in the last 30 years. So we have learned a lot about certain networks in the brain that are important for becoming aware, to be alert, to be awake. We have learned a lot about sleep. We have learned a lot about patients, like vegetative patients, comatose patients. In particular, I've been involved in some projects concerning pathologies of consciousness, like trying to understand what do you need to see in the brain in order to understand whether or not a patient is going to wake up after being in a vegetative state for a year or two. So, what do you need to actually look for in the brain activity? Mm-hmm. And of course, now I would say in the last 10 years, it's been like a boom in psychedelics research. So people want to understand what happens when you're high, mm-hmm. under certain hallucinogenics, which is, that's a bit tricky, because then you need to conceptualize what does it mean to have an experience under this kind of drugs, and then what is the best way of characterizing the brain activity to know what's going on. Mm-hmm. But I would say that's one of the most interesting approaches so far, and the other one is just trying to go into the I would say into the more complicated question, which is how can I explain my own experience? So mm-hmm. not my own Andrés experience, but the first person experience, the qualitative experience, not trying to understand whether someone else is aware or not, but trying to understand how my awareness works from a first person point of view. And these are the people that are actually interested in studying how different contents of the mind change as a function of your awareness. That's what I do, basically, mainly. And then you have the problem of, okay, how are you going to do that? So how do you study that? So one way is playing with the perception. Let's say, trying to understand, let's say, what's the difference between imagining a face versus seeing a face. Yeah. There's a clear qualitative difference between the two. Mm-hmm. And then you can look up in the brain what are the correlates, as we call them, or the activity in the brain that is related to one that is absent in the other, or the commonalities between the two, etc. There is another promising approach, which is studying perception in a very, I would say, clever way, which is showing you images or sounds that can be interpreted in different ways. Mm-hmm. One classic example is, I'm not sure if you have seen this phase vase illusion, this classic
for sure.
Visual illusions. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing about these illusions is that I think it's a critical thing, which is the image in itself is not changing. So objectively speaking, the amount of pixels on the screen are exactly the same. They're never changing. However, your experience is actually changing because you're actually interpreting the image in one way or in another way, even though the physical thing is never changing. Yeah. And that speaks immediately about your awareness, because what is actually changing is the way how you are actually experiencing the image in one way or another. So what are the differences, or what are the mechanisms in the brain that allows your awareness to switch between one image or the other, or to interpret one stream of sound or one specific photo in one way or another? And that speaks directly to the question of awareness.
Exactly, right? Because that's the metaphor of the light that you're shining onto, say, the vase side or the face side of the image, right? And is there just very briefly, like, is there something like an answer to that question already? Like, do you kind of like have some sort of idea what the difference is? or where the
Yes,
switch is, let's say.
exactly. So I mean, there are, I would say, if I would have to, yes, I would say there are there is some sort of consensus. So one is the two brain areas that are important for the contents of the mind. So for having something there that can be switched into one object or another is the frontal part of your brain and an area that is in the back called the parietal cortex. So we call that the frontoparietal network, right? And it's not a matter of switching on or switching off these brain areas. It's more about how these two brain areas talk to each other. If they talk to each other loudly and there is a high communication between them, then it's highly likely that you're going to have a switch. Or it's highly likely that the switching is going to happen. If the communication between the two areas is low, then it's highly likely that you're going to be fixed in one or the two states, but not switching.
Okay.
So it's a matter of cross-talking between these two areas.
It's the negotiation
between the two.
Yeah.
We do know, as a general principle, that brains like to work in concert. So in order to perceive or in order to have a qualitative experience that is rich, different brain areas need to be talking to each other. The way how they talk to each other, it's a matter of debate. So one classic example is people have claimed and showed experimentally that two brain areas can talk to each other if they are synchronized. So basically, if the brain activity is actually jumping with the same rhythm. But it has been also shown that there are other ways of communication that has nothing to do with synchrony. That apparently you see a lot of noise between two areas, but if you look deeper and deeper using tools from information theory, you would actually see that they are talking to each other, but in a non-trivial way, not like just jumping together, but more like dancing together, right? So when we dance, we are not doing the same thing at the same time, but we are indeed coordinated. So dancing is a way of communication that is not necessarily doing the same thing at the same time. So the mechanism by which brain areas talk to each other, it's still a matter of debate. But we kind of all agree that you need integration in the brain, what we call it. So it's mainly big parts of the brain talking to each other.
So when you're talking about areas of the brain, are you talking about physically distinct parts, or are these kind of like localized in one big network of connections?
That's a very good question. I think it's both. So when I speak about an area, it can be something as big as an entire lobe, like say the parietal lobe. But it also can be that we know that these areas are also subdivided into smaller areas, and each of these individual regions have a certain function. In the case of consciousness, it's really hard to tell what's the function, because our science is like in its teenage years. But we do know that there are a lot of specialization in the brain. So there are areas that are specialized for, let's say, processing faces. There are areas that are specialized for processing objects, and we know that. There are tiny, tiny subparts of this whole lobe, but still, it's a vast network of millions of neurons that is devoted to for processing face information and not other type of information, under certain, of course, experimental conditions. Now, the question becomes more complicated if you scale up the problem, because now the problem is not whether I'm seeing a face or a house on a screen, but whether or not I'm becoming aware of a face, let's say in an experiment where I'm flashing the face really, really fast. So if I flash the face for, let's say, more than 20 milliseconds, I would be able to report that I see the face. But if I flash it for less than 15 milliseconds, then I won't be able to do that. So then the question is, I presented the face for a very brief amount of time. So the face was present on a screen, but I'm incapable of reporting it. So what happened there? So we know that when you are incapable of reporting that you see this face when I flash it really fast, we know that the information doesn't reach the frontal lobe. It kind of reached the parietal, the back of the head, but it doesn't crawl up. And in order to become aware of the face, you need more time exposing the face in order for that to crawl up. Now, a friend of mine is doing very nice experiments that he's showing that in order to see a face, you don't need 15, you need 4 milliseconds, 4. And then you can actually report it, or at least the brain can actually process it. So these things happen really, really fast. They improve with training, and so on and so forth. So what I was trying to say is that one thing is to ask the question, are there specialized areas of the brain that are responsible for certain functions? The answer is absolutely yes. But when you're trying to investigate how these different areas talk to each other, to be accountable for your faculty of awareness, then the problem starts becoming more and more complex. Because now it's about the cross-talking between brain areas in very, very specific circumstances where you manipulate the presence or absence of an object on a screen, or the interpretation of it, etc.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's clear enough.
It doesn't matter. we're in a conversation.
Good.
Like I'm surprised that you brought up these visual priming experiments there now, which I have been aware of like for over 30 years, I guess. And it's always been interesting. And now that you say it, I see the aspect of like, where do you actually start defining consciousness as like conscious experience? Because you were talking about experience. If the body subconsciously experiences, which it does, as you said, there you have like for certain priming experience, you can see, okay, like below whatever, like you said, 4 milliseconds for faces or whatever. Like, but what is taking place below that? Will that be the cutoff point where we talk about conscious experience versus subconscious experiencing? But the subconscious experiencing still is experiencing somehow. If you know what I mean, like so even there it is kind of like difficult to tell the difference between, or like, and so, but the cool thing is, like, if you find out experimentally where this cutoff is, then you can look for patterns that are different above that millisecond range versus below that millisecond range. Exactly. And right. Yeah. And
exactly.
And
yes.
And when you and when you get to that level of neural activity, you say there is no such thing as localization anymore.
There is less localization, I would say. Exactly. Of course, there are gonna be people that are gonna say, "Well, but you're speaking about one dominant theory that says that you need broadcasting in the brain." But of course, there are other theories that claim that consciousness can happen much more locally, like in the back of the head, and they don't need the frontal cortex. There is still debate, but I want to be extremely clear about this. The overwhelming evidence that we have around tells us that you need long-distance communication in the brain for awareness. There are other experiments and other theories that claim that you only need the back of your head, but I wouldn't say those theories have enough support, empirical support.
Well, for me, it's kind of like a no-brainer. That if one thing changes in the system, it changes the whole system. So even if something just like a switch flicks here, like you don't even need to call it you don't even need to call it communication, because it doesn't even need to travel in order to make a difference. That's at least that's how I see it.
Yes, that's a very good point, because for many years we had this very I would say, it's kind of an area centric view of the brain, that we try to map very precisely which areas are related to which function, and then we end up with a very rich map, which is the famous Brodmann area map, which is absolutely true. But the thing is, now we do know that in order to perform any kind of volitional action, or to experience anything in the world around us, it's not just a matter of activating or deactivating certain areas. Of course, that's the case. Otherwise, if you wouldn't have activated your face region area when you're seeing a face, you wouldn't be able to see a face. But seeing a face is not just activating a button in the brain. There are so many other things going on. So you need, first of all, information from the external world reaching your eyes or your retina, then the back of your head, which is the visual cortex, then this face processing area. But then, what are you going to do with that information? Are you going to make a decision about it? Are you going to press a button if you're in a specific experiment? Am I going to say hi to Marcus if I recognize him on the street? Am I going to run away from Marcus if I don't want to talk to him? What am I going to do? So it is true that perception happens at certain stage, but as you mentioned, it's not just that. There is a whole context in which we're embedded in that determines or basically modulates perception itself. So the new model of the mind is that every sensory process is also influenced by things that happened in the front of it. If planning, predicting, anticipating is part of your normal experience, then all these perceptions that are very like the starting point of the whole process are also modulated by these more contextual processes. So it's a continuous feed forward and feedback communication between brain areas. It's a complex network. And you made a very nice distinction, which is the fact that sometimes you don't need A to be able to talk to B in the brain, but the mere fact that you have a super rich network going on, if you change the little conditions of one part, you're going to modify the conditions of another part, just for the sake of the structure, how the brain is wired. So we call that also communication, in order to understand what we're doing. But it's true that you have physical connections between areas that can be modified by modifying the two ends or the 10,000 ends. But also you have functional connections that are defined as relationships or correlations between activity, not just structural connections, but functional relations. So you have these two worlds, the structure and the function, again, and we go back to Aristotle.
So let's go back for now to the, like you said, you have that area which lights up when you see a face, right? How does that compare to, say, the other extreme where you're imagining a face? Is that the same area?
Yeah, it is. That's a cool question. But then I for someone who likes to run experiments like me, to me it's absolutely obvious that if you close your eyes and you try to imagine, I'm trying to imagine the last image that I had of your face at the moment. To me, it's absolutely clear that I'm seeing a face, and to me, it's absolutely clear if there are some aspects of that face that the area of the face area has to be in some way involved. But how do you study that? Because if I close my eyes and I start imagining the face, for us to analyze brain data, we need clear onsets. So we need to know exactly when did you start the imagination process and when did it end. Mainly, where the hell did it start? So we can go there and look on a trial by trial basis, on repetitive iterations of this process, what is going on in the brain in terms of the networks, etc. But what happens when you don't have an onset, a clear onset? Because I can close my eyes and I can do I'm imagining your face, but when did it start? So it's really hard to know when. So it's a very, it's a practical problem, but we deal with these practical problems all the time because we want to do experiments. While if I just flash you a face on a screen, it's very clear that I have the perfect onset, and I can go and see in your brain what happens when I presented the screen on the face on the screen. So we have more clever ways of dealing with that. We can do that. And I did that.
This is inspiring to me, because like I'm starting to think that it could be really cool if you would work with hypnotherapists and how they induce trance states in people, let's say, because that moment where the induction happens, that could be the trigger. That could be your, like, okay, this is the point, and here we're seeing what changes in the mind of the recipient of the.
Yes. So this is interesting because this wasn't planned at all, and we just published a paper on face perception using hypnosis.
Oh.
We did exactly that. It took us 10 years to do it. Mm-hmm. I started that project with a colleague that he's now in Sweden with Renzo Lanfranco in 2011, back at home, back in Chile. Mm-hmm. And then I was finishing uni by then, and I was totally crazy because people say, why do you want to study this kind of weird thing? Why do you want to ruin your career from the very beginning? I said, because it's interesting, mm-hmm. right? It's really interesting to know how you can generate a complete world inside you without any physical input, mm-hmm. just by the instruction of some weird guy that is trying to hypnotize you. Mm-hmm. And it happens that Renzo, he's a clinical psychologist now. He's a neuroscientist, mm-hmm. as well, but he's also an expert on clinical hypnosis. Mm-hmm. So he said, "Yeah, let's do it." So we started ages ago, and then it was a nightmare because you need to from 200 people that we were interviewing, he was passing the test to all of them. There is a hypnotizability test, mm-hmm. that you can run on people in order to know, mm-hmm. exactly how hypnotizable they are. And depending on your level, if you're just like a normal dude, I'm joking here, but if you rank 5 in the scale, it means that you can have very unusual experiences. And one of them is to hallucinate. You can hallucinate visually or auditorily. So from the 200 people that Renzo interviewed and did the whole thing, we ended up with 14 that could hallucinate. And from those 14, only 7 could hallucinate faces. Mm-hmm. So it was a nightmare. The sample was a nightmare. But then we had like a very, very special cohort of people that we treated like gold. And then we made them to actually either see faces on a screen, to imagine those faces, or, based on what you mentioned, these hypnotic suggestions, to hallucinate the faces. And we compare what happens in that area. With the EEG, with electroencephalography, there is a very clear mark in the time series that you can observe when people are seeing faces or imagining faces, mm-hmm. or in this case, hallucinating faces. Mm-hmm. And what happens is that there is a very similar effect between imagining the face and hallucinating the face. Mm-hmm. But the hallucination, the strength and the amplitude of the signal in that area for when you're hallucinating is much bigger than when you're just imagining. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we call the paper Beyond Imagination and so on, because it's not like imagining, it's something more. Mm-hmm. It's like imagination on steroids, mm-hmm. in terms of the brain signal. Mm-hmm. The other critical thing is not the brain marker, but I was absolutely flabbergasted by the fact that people, when Renzo was doing his magic, and then they were clearly hallucinating a face on a screen, we asked them to rank how real the image was between 1 and 10. Right? So for the perceived faces, for the faces that were actually there, it was a 10. But for the hallucinated faces, there was nothing on a screen except for a gray oval. It was also a 9 or a 10. And then some people were asking you, why are you asking me this question? Of course, the image is on the screen. And to me, it's amazing to witness that. Everyone should witness that once in their lives, because it gives you goosebumps, like to know that in that specific moment, in the same room, there is someone living a completely different reality than you, but you are the only one who knows that he's or she the one that is not here. It's such an amazing thing. And it took 10 years to publish because it was very difficult to get the sample, get the controls to analyze the data. My PhD happens in the middle, reviewers, all the process. But now it's published in a very good journal, and I'm very proud of that one because it was a weirdo. But to me, it was a definite moment in the sense that you say, okay, most of our life is just internal. Most of the things that we judge is just how you see things at the end of the day. I'm not saying that everyone is hypnotized, but
no.
But it tells you a lot of very strong things.
I think it's what I find particularly fascinating about this is that I've always been a friend of the idea that imagination is not making a copy of what we experience through our senses, right? Like if I think about a particular face, that doesn't have to mean that I have to visually recreate it in my mind. There's more data available that can bring that back. Maybe it's just sort of like even just the digital information, like it's Andrés, right? Like maybe the fact that my level of consciousness is only to maybe repeat the auditory information Andrés, right? And it kind of like, but it's enough for me to believe that I imagine your face. If you know what I mean. But then, exactly. and now that you talk about hallucination, which is basically the other side of, or is like as you say, on steroids, imagination on steroids, where you're actually capable, or where your mind recreates the exact image or the exact pattern of neural activity. I don't know if that's the case, but I'm just saying that that you get when you're actually experiencing something coming in from the outside.
Yes, and I think that's very relevant for what you do as a musician, because we did it in the interview for Talking Brains that I was shocked by the fact that you were creating what you do in an ongoing manner. So there is kind of a loop thing that's going on there that it's dictating what's next, but it's mainly driven by your inner sense, right? By your inner eye, your inner ear, whatever you want to call it. And that relies on imagination. And it's beyond imagination in the sense that it also relies on everything else that you have experienced before. Because imagination is not just going into the into the storage in your brain that has that image exactly as you saw it once and just calling it back. No, it's not that. Every time that you imagine something, you need to recreate that something from scratch. So memory, for instance, is not something fixed. Memory is always an active process. You're always reigniting the networks in your brain that were responsible for that phase. So as a matter of fact, memory is just a constant recreation of something. And that's why memories change, because they're not stable over time, because they rely on reactivating the same network over and over again. But those networks are not cables made out of copper. They're made out of biological stuff, and biological stuff changes all the time. In particularly neurons, they change all the time. So So even imagination is not a fixed process that you just go to a bucket of things that you have remembered and you just call them back. It's not that.
Yeah, that's why the analogy that is often being used for the brain to be a computer is obviously not.
It's terrible.
It's terrible. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's like the interesting thing with a computer memory. Let's say, like you're trying to compress the data for it to take less space, right? In a way, and in the brain, I find, like, or in my experience with my brain, it's the opposite. Like I expand the data for it to take less space somehow.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's a distributed system instead of just You're not using many zip algorithms.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Hey, so just one more thought here. So you were studying this hypnotic state, with a particular projection of face, right? That was kind of like the idea, the faces. I'm sure, because you were talking also about psychedelics, right? Like, so for example, you could have somebody in a coma, in a hospital bed. You could have like yourself or me, like saying we're normally, awake somehow.
Sure,
you could have somebody on whatever, mescaline or LSD or whatever, and study what the difference is. Like you call that like the research of the states, right? Of the so what can you tell us about the research results in that field? I mean, has there been anything that you think is of great value to understanding consciousness? And can you explain what it is?
Yeah. So I think the first thing I would like to say is that you need to be very careful in conceptualizing what's the value of this kind of research, right? So, of course, you don't need to justify why are you interested in understanding how psychedelics work in the brain. You don't need, we're in a free world. And if there is some funding agency that likes the approach, then you go for it. But I think the main motivation here is the assumption that the normal range of experiences that you might have during a psychedelic experience, it's kind of enlarged. So basically the repertoire of things that you can become aware of are expanded, right? That's an assumption. I'm not saying that that's the case. It's what people report, right? So if that's the case, well, you have something that you need to be explained. It needs to be explained, right? You have a certain experience that is not like your normal waking state, that it feels in a specific manner. It feels expanded. It feels richer. People have all kinds of experiences associated to transcending experiences, all sort of things that are not in your normal awareness or on your daily basis when you don't go to the office anymore, but when you work from home, right? And those experiences are demanding an explanation. And then you go to the brain and you put people on drugs and then you see what happens. So what has been discovered in the last 6-7 years, and this is research from mainly Michael Shatner, which is a good friend, he has shown that when you try to measure the brain activity during those states, and you try to compress it to see how rich the information in the brain is at that moment, it happens that when you're in a normal waking state, the amount of compression that you can make is, let's say, this. But when you're in a trip, the amount of compression that you can make is this. So you cannot really compress much the brain activity. What does that mean? Compression, in this sense, is just an approach for quantifying how crazy your brain activity is at that specific moment.
How complex the data is.
How complex the data is. In the same way how you can compress a very repetitive image or a very repetitive audio file is gonna be really, really easy to be compressed. But if it's not rich enough, but if it's rich and complex enough, it's not gonna be very compressible. In the same way, they do that with the brain activity, and the complexity of your brain increases when you are having those trips, when you're under certain hallucinogenics. What does that mean? Well, we don't know. That's the result that I can mention. It is true that it correlates very nicely with the things that people describe during those trips. So people describe an expanded perception, certain types of experiences that you are not aware of in your daily life. So the implication there, or the inference there, is that those differences in the richness in the experience is directly related to this increase in complexity or decrease in compressibility of your brain activity. Now, these studies are made using this approach of the state, right? So I have someone with the drug and without the drug, and I just compare how compressible the data is, and I just find that the data is more complex when you're hallucinating. Now, I would love to know now whether or not you can actually relate certain contents of that experience to other more, I would say, more detailed mechanisms in the brain. We don't know that yet. We have no idea yet. We also don't know, and this is something that I make as a note, we also do not know whether these experiences are actually pointing to something else. That's the spiritual aspect of the discussion, right? Whether or not these experiences, because of the nature of the hallucinogenic that you're trying, are actually connecting you with something else. I am agnostic about that. I'm only telling you that it seems that the brain activity is much more complex when you're under certain drugs.
So let me just ask about, like, so what about the other direction, like anesthetics, for example, right?
Yeah.
Is it also, as you would expect, that the patterns get simpler or like more compressible?
Yeah, it's exactly like that. So there is a very nice, I would say, relation between the level of consciousness and the compressibility, or the amount of complexity, if we put it in complexity terms. So the more simple your brain activity is, the less complex it is. And this happens between states as well. So when you're in deep sleep, meaning when you're sleeping but not dreaming, brain activity tends to be very repetitive. And this is also observable in the brain waves that the brain generates when you're asleep. They're very, 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 very high amplitude and very, very, very slow, but they're very repetitive. They repeat like 1 to 2 cycles per second, 1 to 2 hertz. And that is, if you try to compress that, you're going to see that the compression is really high. But the moment that you become alert or awake again, and you start having your normal functions running, complexity starts increasing.
I have one.
And apparently, just to finish the idea, apparently what people want to claim, but I'm not sure if that still holds, is that if this psychedelic state is a specific state that is above normal alertness or normal wakefulness, the immediate prediction is that complexity should be higher in those states than when you're normally awake. We don't know that yet. And even if that would be the case, that doesn't tell you necessarily that psychedelics are a superior state of consciousness. It sells really well. It was if you read these papers, the press made a lot of buzz out of it, like, oh, psychedelics are a superior state of consciousness. Good luck with that. But at least it's telling you that if there are more stuff going on in your brain, and these experiences are more disorganized or they are richer, of course you're going to have more complexity. But whether or not does that mean that you're in a superior state of consciousness, that's a different discussion. And I don't have a specific opinion about that. That can be recorded.
Okay, so that's so like my question here is now, if we're looking at like compressibility, or you could say like how many correlations can you find, right? Like the more correlations you can find, the more compressible it is, right?
Yeah.
So, but that doesn't really tell you anything really about the quality of the pattern, let's say.
Absolutely.
Right. So the first question I have here is like, what do you know about the frequency, like the speed of the activity, right? Because you can have super high speed, but it can still be super compressible, and vice versa, right? So
Yes.
so do these psychedelics induced states tend to have faster processing as well, or what do you know about that?
Yeah. That's what people are doing as we speak.
Mm-hmm.
This is the kind of questions that people are trying to resolve as we speak.
Mm-hmm.
So we really don't know. I can speculate a bit if you want, but so we do know that when you're actively engaging in a task, the frequency at which your brain works is higher, and we call that gamma activity. That is really fast. It's between 30 to 200, 250 hertz, and it's the rhythm by which neurons fire that you can see from outside, that you can see from an electrode either in the surface of your skull or even an electrode inside the brain. You see these effects that are very, very high in frequency. And we know that those frequencies are related to cognition, attention, perception, hearing, touching, seeing, etc. Now, whether or not that frequency is going to double its speed when you are under the effects of a drug, like a psychedelic drug, I don't know. And I think we don't know. And whether or not that high frequency activity is going to be repetitive or just random, we also don't know. What the compression is telling us is that if you see higher compression, what that implies is that the activity has to be in some way repetitive. But we don't know whether it's a fast repetition or a slow repetition. We don't know. Now, if you look at the structure of the brain, how the brain works, what we do know is that the faster the brain cycles per second, the less repetitive the activity tends to be. So when you have very, very fast rhythms, the rhythms are not fixed in a specific frequency. So I haven't seen any effect so far that tells me that you see something specifically at 82 to 90 hertz, because that would be a very, very, very repetitive, fast signal. We tend to believe that in the past, but that has been already shown that is not the case. When you have fast rhythms, we still call them rhythms, but they are not rhythms. They're very broad band effects. You have fast effects, but they are in a very, very wide range of frequencies that can go from 30 to 300 hertz. But it's a huge blob that you see in the brain activity. It's not a specific band in the high frequency range. That's exactly the opposite as what happens with the lower frequencies. We have clear 10 hertz effects that are related to other functions, much more clear 4 to 6 hertz effects that are related to other brain functions. But when we speak about rhythms that are fast, I wouldn't call them rhythms. They're just broadband effects. So what I would expect is that even if you speed up the process when you're under some hallucinogenic drugs, you wouldn't have like a specific band in which those processes are happening. You probably would increase the blob, the range of high frequencies where these things are going on. But that's my opinion. Yeah.
Like for me as a musician and engineer, it kind of like makes sense, you know.
Good.
But like maybe this is not a fair question now, but as a neuroscientist, the what you're looking at most of the time, I guess, is the electric uh, information, right?
Yeah.
So that means that like all the other potential systems of communication that are in the brain are sort of like obviously not being looked at the same time.
Yes.
You just sort of like, even if it's not your main field of work, but what do people do in that regard with measurements of neurotransmitters and stuff like that? Does stuff like that exist in neurosciences?
It does exist. Um, I have to defend the electrical activity.
No, you don't. You don't have to defend it.
I will, because you could do a fMRI, of course. So you can have scanners, and there is of course, scanners are amazing because they can tell you exactly where things are happening. They cannot tell you really well when things are happening. So they're not very good with timing. They're kind of slow, even though they're getting better. You can have, let's say, in 1 second, 2 samples of what's going on in the brain. With an EEG, you can have 1,000 samples per second. So for studying the dynamics of any process, the best tool we have are based on electrophysiology. Yeah. But of course, there might be slow processes that are underlying this electrical activity that we have no idea that they're there. But to be honest with you, I'm not saying that they're not relevant. I'm just saying that at the end of the day, what you want is like a summary measure of millions of neurons working at the same time, because we know that the brain works in concert. So it's very valuable to have single neuron recordings of synaptic activity or calcium imaging or the amount of blood of oxygenation that you have to certain region, etc. But if and only if you're measuring groups of neurons instead of just individual ones. Because even though that can be insightful for understanding the mechanisms by which single neurons work, I'm not sure if that's the right level of analysis for cognition. Because in order to become aware of something or to perceive, you need concerts. You need big gigs in the brain. And those big gigs in the brain cannot be captured with local recordings, but with bigger recordings, like the ones that you do with EEG or even with intracortical recordings that you're measuring whole batches of neurons. But of course, you can play with the fMRI. You can play with another tools that allows you to record not only the neural activity, but also all the other cells that are in the brain that are 5 times more than neurons. Like we call them glia, which are other types of cells that are not neurons that serve a lot of different functions. And they also work as neurons sometimes, so they can also transfer information in an electrical sense. But they're there for like supporting the neurons structurally, feeding the neurons, creating the conditions by which neurons can propagate their electrical activity fast. And we have no idea what are they doing. We just found out, I would say 15 years ago, that they are also form networks that are as rich as the neural networks. These astrocytes that are one type of glia, they create massive networks. They can also move charges, so they can also transfer electrical information. But we cannot record them before because we're fixated with the neurons for very good reasons, right? Yeah. But all I'm saying is that there is a whole parallel universe, like 3 more parallel universes in the brain that are unrelated to neurons with other cells that we have no clue how they're influencing the overall cognitive ability or anything.
Like
really.
It's this was not the reason why I asked the question, but like thinking about it, just the way that people use language to describe psychological states, let's say, right? So where somebody with depression, you would say, like, some people would say chemical imbalance in the brain, or,
Yes.
so using the term of imbalance, right? So, and since when you're researching consciousness, right? Like, I'm just thinking out loud here. Like, again, I don't know what I'm talking about.
Go ahead.
But basically what you're looking for is sort of that tipping point somehow, right? Like where the balance changes, like in the electrical activity, and like this is just, if you say you have like a bucket full of water, of salt water, and you're putting one drop of unsalty water in it, right? So like the question is like I don't like the way that the solution changes, let's say.
Exactly.
Right? So if and I know that that's super difficult to do, even like how would you do that? Like the invasive aspect of measuring something like that is like, but you know what I mean? Like, so I'm kind of like thinking that maybe there are so many other layers of information kind of like present where the problem may be that we are not looking at that layer where that change.
It's actually, the most relevant one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I agree with that criticism. The best metaphor that we can use that I really like is like, okay, let's say that you are trying to identify a person inside a stadium. Like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
so Stickman is playing. And then you have a lot of weirdos looking at the band. And then you're outside the venue, and then you want to identify someone in the audience. And the only tool you have is one microphone.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you throw the microphone inside the venue, and then the microphone basically falls somewhere. Mm-hmm. And you're gonna hear people shouting or singing, but you're gonna have basically the buzz of all the background noise that everyone is making, including the band and etc. Mm-hmm. And then the question is, how can I identify this specific person out of this mess? Well, the metaphor that I just made is what neuroscience does at the moment with EEG and all these devices. We have no clue. Mm-hmm. We can't. We can identify certain groups of voices, if you want, by doing very sophisticated source reconstruction, PCA, ICA, etc. things. But at the end of the day, it's really, really hard to tell which one is which. We just have the chorus or the groups of people singing kind of approach. And then you can say, yeah, but how do you know that this is the right level? How do you know that the person that is causing the problem inside the venue is not the group of, it's just one guy that is annoying everyone else? How can you actually identify this person? Well, we are not there yet. Mm-hmm, yeah. Now, having said that, I do believe that the next step that the field is kind of moving slowly and not very successfully, is trying to combine the different levels. Mm-hmm. So let's say that you have in one individual or in one animal at least 2 or 3 levels where you're capturing the activity. Mm-hmm. The level of the single neuron, the level of little groups, and the level of massive groups of neurons. We can do that. Mm-hmm. We can do that at the same time. Mm-hmm. The question is, what are the principles that relate one level to the next one? Mm-hmm. We have no idea. Yeah. Like we have certain models, and I'm not saying it in a nasty way. I'm just saying that it's very difficult. Because in order to understand how A and B are related to each other, first you need to know what A and B are for real, and then to find some kind of bridge between the two. So it's really hard, and I think that's something that I'm very looking forward to see in the future, like how these different and again, it can be a failed project, a failed program, because it might be the case that you become very good at describing what these two levels are doing, but then you don't gain any new insight about any problem, right? So, but that's a good thing, because at least we will know that it's not the right approach. I have the impression that there is something big there, that it should happen in this century, which is the crosstalk between levels and how these levels generate more information than the sum of the parts. And how is that non-additive effect related to diseases or to normal brain function. So
yeah,
I don't want to sound
no, it's just a field where just even trying to come up with some sort of experimental design that would allow the manipulation of the parameters, like it's
yes, and there's so many, they become like too many. Yeah. So it's work in progress. I think we're like 4 to 5 Nobel Prizes in between now and, for instance, finding out if there is a single neural mechanism of consciousness, what that mechanism is. I measure things in terms of Nobel Prizes. So I think we're 5 Nobel Prizes away, 5 Nobel Prizes specifically devoted to this topic, not just 5 more years. 5 Nobel Prizes devoted to neuroscience away from knowing what happens with consciousness.
Wow.
So that's a very long time span that I'm giving to you. But it's fun, at least, to be part of all of this process in a small way.
You know, it's fascinating, because like when you're talking about the data that you're capturing and like the analysis you can run, and just the fact that we do have FFT, you know, for example, to find patterns, exactly. Right? Like that is already such an exciting thing. So, and if you imagine, like you have computers that are, you know, ever more powerful, faster, and you know, that's why I'm totally with you, and I'm with you that what you do studying the electrical activity is kind of like the way to go, because that is what's manageable, and that is also what holds some sort of future in it, because we know that the analytical tools will get better and faster, right?
Yes.
So
yeah. And as a complement of that remark, I would say that we also need a good theory, because the level of sophistication that we have at the moment for analyzing brain data is huge. Now we have all the AI, machine learning stuff that is like intruding our field, and everyone is doing it now because they can do it. But we need very good theory or hypothesis or conceptual frameworks that can guide our questions in a meaningful way. And I think that's critical. That's something that our field, because it's in its teenage years, doesn't really have so far. There are attempts for unifying, or even not for unifying, but for describing theoretically different processes that are critical for cognition. But there is no such. We still need a James Clerk Maxwell in our field that can find different things and unify electricity with magnetism. And in our case, it's gonna be like unifying like 10 fields. So it's gonna be like a Maxwell on steroids again. We don't have those people yet. We have attempts of that. I'm gonna be crucified, but that's what I think. So we're not there yet. So I think we need very good theory as well.
Yeah, that's
in parallel with the technological advances and with the sophistication in the way how we scan brains and all of that. We need good theory.
Yeah. For me, it's been fascinating in recent years to consume more science, let's say, right, and to realize that in institutionalized science, at least, I don't know anything. Well, anyway, there seems to be this like a certain cutoff point where like certain thoughts are not being made somehow, because they're not allowed, because, as you say, maybe you're kind of like sabotaging your career, and
That's
and I find this fascinating, because like even in the conversation with Anil Seth that you had, like, which I really enjoyed very much. It was great, and he's great.
cool.
But there was like I couldn't get away from having this feeling that there was like a certain argument, let's say, that he just wouldn't accept. And I mean that like in a way almost like a blind spot, right? So
What was that blind spot specifically? If
well, I
or it was just more like a general feeling.
yeah, it was
okay,
a general feeling, right? Like
Okay. Yeah.
to sort of like maybe like I think like all the thinking he does like is correct, but he doesn't take the next the next step, right? So where he applies it to itself somehow, as if he doesn't want to do the recursion on top of the recursion somehow. That's how I would describe it. And I don't you know I
Yeah, of course.
and I
of
don't
course.
you know want to you know
No. I think he gets these comments all the time, by the way.
oh,
But I agree with you that so Anil is an excellent example of a very good thing for the field, because he has been popularizing consciousness in a very nice way,
yeah.
and he's such a nice guy, so he can do it very, very easily. But I think there is like a not that cool side of popularizing things, in the sense that you become now a public figure in some way. So you become like a meme, like a living meme. So people you become an influencer in a nice way, right? So everything that you say, everything that you tweet, everything that you mention can be, distorted. So I think I understand why he sticks to his guns, in the sense of stick to the science, to the evidence. He also is very good at theorizing. He's one of the people that I really admire because of that. So he's very good at maybe not taking the next step, a massive next step, but at least trying to synthesize all the data that we have around. You might like or you might not like what was his theory, but at least he's trying to. Now, the next step, if I interpret what you're saying correctly, in your case would be, okay, we have all of this knowledge. I'm gonna stop pretending that doesn't apply to me, and I'm just gonna try to do some introspection with all the knowledge we have, and I'm gonna tell you what I think. Okay, that approach, I would say, ended up really badly in the last century. You're a psychologist, so you know about introspectionism. Neurophenomenology, the Francisco Varela approach, is not that, but it's also very complicated to do. So I think what I'm trying to say is that extracting general principles of how cognitive processes work based on very specific experimental designs under very specific conditions, and making inferences out of that, general inferences out of that, it's already, to me, a big leap of faith. Because generalizing about things that are very specific, even if I can reproduce them, even if I can have 10,000 iterations of the same thing and end up with the same result, they're still based on very specific experimental tasks, like people sitting in front of a screen, looking at certain stimuli that are isolated from everything else, controlled conditions at certain times during the day. It's very, very, very restricted in the sense that, but this is how science works. You need to have controlled conditions, otherwise you wouldn't have replicability at all. So getting a result out of an experiment like this, and then trying to infer general principles out of that, is already a big task. Now, the next step that you're suggesting is that using those general principles that are just extrapolations of single data points to apply them to yourself. I think it's really complicated. You could do it.
It is, but I think that's what philosophy is, right? Or does.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's
and then Anil would say, I'm not a philosopher.
Yeah, exactly. And I see his point there as well. But just the very fact that we're on one hand saying that we sort of like fill in the gaps, like an example that Anil would give, right? But then at the same time, we talk about the brain as if it's something that is there independently of our experiencing.
Yes, floating in the air. Yes.
And that is kind of absurd to me, right? So, but I also understand that people don't want to go there, because if you go there, you already know that you're not going to find an answer. Mm-hmm. So, but maybe finding the answer is not what the real objective is. Maybe the real objective would be to actually to really ask the question, right? And that's how it's been for me. That's why it's easy for me to say that. Like in my life of minor enlightenment, let's say, which I wouldn't even call like that, but
micro enlightenment.
but like that's sort of like where I find, discussing these things with you, I find the openness in you to where you do kind of like put your research into the context of humanity, where humans like do want to believe in whatever, right? So that's yes. It's a human thing, right? And I think it's important in also in sciences to somehow be aware that that's the context in which we're operating, and that it's not just a black box of mathematics or data analysis.
I agree.
I mean, tell us about your experience with meditation, and
Yes, I was about to mention that, because it's true that I am kind of dissatisfied. Then you would say, why are you dissatisfied if you have a successful-ish career and blah, blah, blah? Well, I'm not dissatisfied with science. I'm not dissatisfied with what I do. I'm very happy with what I do. But I think that there is a whole neglected area. Not neglected, but kind of ignored area that people, I would say, unpleasantly call it spirituality, because you immediately have like you said, I hear the word and my brain immediately start making associations about what the word means, and then you start thinking about spirits and things that are no. But generally speaking, you know what I mean, which are experiences that are only described by the observer of those experiences, and epistemologically speaking, they're equally valid as an explanation based on neuroscience. To me. Some people might say, yeah, but if someone is hallucinating, you wouldn't call them. I mean, how do you know that the things that you're experiencing in meditation, for instance, are experiences that are generalizable, or they can be studied scientifically, or they can actually help us understanding consciousness? Well, those questions to me are completely irrelevant, because I think, why would you need to explain experiences in the first time? I'm going to play advocate's devil here. What's the value of explaining what happens to you? And what does it mean to explain something? What does that mean? Does it mean to reduce your experience to something more fundamental, like a physical substrate, or like a brain, or like a whatever what we've been discussing for the last hour? And would you be happy with that as a sentient being, to know that, like the Pink Floyd songs say, everything you feel, everything you hear, everything you touch is just a matter of spiking activity in your brain? Okay, cool. But what about the experience itself? What about the quality of that experience? And on that note, I've been meditating, I would say, since lockdown 1.0 started. I always wanted to do it, but I didn't have the time. And I said, yeah, next. And then I had so much time available that I just started doing so. And I then later on learned properly with a teacher of transcendental meditation. And it was very interesting because I I finally realized that I don't know how to say this, but I finally realized that there is a place that you can reach that is, it feels that is completely independent of your normal thinking. That is like the base of the thinking. That is like the ground. I don't know how to, well, people call it the ground of being. I don't know how I can call it, but it's somewhere there that I'm not even sure if the word somewhere is appropriate because it implies a physical place. I'm not saying that, but there is an experience that feels like a ground, like a ground of all other things, possibly the ground that lent existence to all other things. And you kind of start having like a grasp of what that is by doing this procedure that I discovered that is possibly the most scientific thing that I ever done, because you can repeat it every day. And it's quantifiable because you can describe what happens. It's also very reliable and robust in the sense that the kind of experiences that you have are the same every day in your own, practice. So then I started reading a whole bunch of stuff about what the hell is this. I started asking questions to people. I interviewed people on the channel about this. I have had a lot of discussions with my teacher. I'm gonna interview a very famous Swami for the channel in the next month. So it ignited a whole new parallel universe in my brain. And it has been like a tipping point, I would say, in my life. It sounds extremely grandiloquent, but it's true that you don't have those many moments in your life, moments that you say, okay, there is a click here. I had one when I saw an interview of Francisco Varela on TV, and I said, I want to do this. I want to study neuroscience my whole life. And I remember the moment, like watching the TV, the interview when I was 13. I remember that. I had another one when I finished the PhD, and I said, I want to do this with my life in terms of my research. And I had this other one that I said, oh, wait a second. Maybe, and just maybe, there is a realm of things that are not things that are running in parallel here. And they don't need to be metaphysical, but yeah, but it's interesting. And again, how you can reconcile that with what I do, the answer to me is, let's be gentle. So just suspend your judgment and see what happens. Keep the practice going. Now I'm in touch with the David Lynch Foundation, so they're gonna fund a study for running a brain analysis on meditators of TM, just to see whether we can get a better insight in what this thing is.
Has there been any research into that already?
There are. Yeah, there has Fred Travis. He's the scientist that has been studying TM for the last 30 years. There are very nice studies showing that when you are in that state of mind, the whole brain starts oscillating at 10 hertz. So it's this called alpha band, which is a very, very narrow frequency band. And mainly the whole brain starts like jumping at 10 hertz. This oscillation has been related to different cognitive functions like creativity or like problem solving, etc., etc. So there are research on that. But I want to bring all the 21st century tools that I've been using for the last 10 years to dig deeper into the state, to do it with people that have been meditating for more than 15 years, to have the reports, to relay the reports with the neural data on a millisecond by millisecond way to record other physiological features that are related to the state of trance, like your respiration. So we know, for instance, that when you're in that deep state, you almost stop breathing.
Mm-hmm.
So you look like you're not breathing. Actually, your respiration pattern starts becoming almost flat. So there is a relationship between the apnea and the brain activity that is also interesting to capture. That has been described for 3,000 years. This is not new.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is from the Vedic tradition. This is in the Upanishads. This is there. This has been there for ages. And I guess for a very good reason, because it's so universal that everyone can reach that if you practice in the right way, I would say. Yeah. So again, maybe there is a connection between the two things. Maybe there is not, but I'm not concerned about it.
Yeah, I'm just a little curious now. If you had to come up with a hypothesis, like, or theories for the how should I say this? Like, say the depth of that state of the brain, right? Do you think that you can already tell what it's going to be without doing the research? I know that this is not a question I should ask a researcher, but
it's a very good question, actually, and I want to try. So I would say that it's gonna look very similar to what sleep looks like,
mm-hmm.
but at the same time completely different than sleep.
Mm-hmm.
I'm making no sense at the moment, but
so do you think it's going to be more compressible or less compressible?
I think it's gonna be extremely compressible,
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
almost like if you were dead.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you have the paradoxical effect, which I think to me is the thing that triggers the entire. You have a very paradoxical effect that you are completely flat in the axis of content. So the stuff in your mind stop existing. Not during the process, but when you reach these very, very peculiar moments that they call pure awareness, when there is a cessation in the content in your mind, but the wakefulness is full,
mm-hmm.
which is paradoxical.
Mm-hmm.
Because usually when you're fully alert, you're also fully aware in the sense of contents, the stuff that you have in your mind, right? It's really hard to think, I think there is no example, where you're fully alert, but you're alert of nothing. When you're fully awake and a mammoth is chasing you within a dream, you remember every single detail in your dream. Your dream is full of content, right? Mm-hmm. When you're escaping from some, infected person on the street in our days, you're fully aware of your surroundings, right? You don't want to be run over by a car. You're completely alert and you're completely aware of everything that's happening around you. But in this state, the content is almost zero and the alertness is almost 100, which is very paradoxical for the theories of consciousness that we have currently. Mm-hmm. That alertness and awareness go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
So what's going to happen? My idea is that you're going to have compression that is very close to a dead person, but the report is going to be fully alert. So I have no idea where in the brain do I need to look for the alertness that is unrelated to the awareness of things. So it's and I'm very curious about what's going to happen with all of these metrics.
Yeah.
And we discussed this with Fred Travis a couple of weeks ago and with the CEO of the David Lynch Foundation. It was really cool. Mm-hmm. They're very excited because nobody has applied these tools to this kind of meditation, so I'm very excited.
Yeah, so could be like you were saying, like you have no idea right now where it could be located, or and that yes. would be a major breakthrough, having sort of like an idea. Yeah, I mean, location is probably also like not the right way to think about it. Right?
but the process,
The process,
or
yes.
the signature, we call it the signature.
That's a good word.
Yeah, it's been a thing. So I totally recommend to practice any type of these things, because it gives you like a complete different angle from something that you know that is there. Like your awareness, you know that is there, but do you have any method, first person method, to become aware of that light, to the spotlight?
Hey, would you say that state has anything to do with the experience of being alive? Because you said that it feels like it's almost like a dead person. So
yeah, I'm gonna make sorry for the hippiness of this part, but I think I truly think. Sorry, I got excited and I unplugged myself from the. Let me plug myself again. Okay, there we go. Yeah, I think that's the quality by which you are alive. Okay, let me be more clear. I think that when you reach that state, that is the ground for your existence. It's not just, if we think of consciousness as the quality that makes you aware of everything, then consciousness is the quality by which you are a sentient being, by which you exist. So what if you're tapping, I don't want to use the word essence, because then people would think that I'm talking about a thing. But if you tap the endless bubbling source of that inner force that we call awareness, what if you're closer and closer to that source that is ever changing, is permanent, it never dies, etc.? What if you're just having a little grasp of what that is? I think that how does it feel? It feels like, okay, there is nothing beyond this. That's exactly, I think that's very accurate. You touch something and you say, that's it. This is it. This is it. There is nothing else. There is nothing underlying this, because science is always about finding the underlying source of that, the correlates of this, the causes of this. We have this, there is an inner layer that we want to reach to. If you get there, there's nothing else. That's the impression I have. And it's not a cognitive impression. No, it's not a thought. It's something that you feel when you're there.
Yeah.
It's like a hug. It's like being hugged by someone you love, and you know that you're safe. You know that if you die in that specific moment in time, and if a meteor crashes the earth in that specific moment, it doesn't matter, because you're there. You're there. It's a really nice, very transcendental experience, if you want. And that's why some yogis believe that meditation, and this type of meditation, is a genuine practice of the process of dying. Because when you die, as you mentioned, every cease to exist. Your cognition gets fragmented, thought starts disappearing, and then suddenly you are in the same place that I apparently tap 20 minutes twice a day for the last 2 years.
Yes.
With the difference is that you just don't come back.
Yeah.
That was my hippie moment.
That was your hippie moment. No, I can, this may sound strange, but I can just create that state in myself, just in an instant. I don't do it often, but I can just go there if I want to.
Yeah.
And I felt like we could have stopped a few times already. So like now it's like the last question or like idea I want to put out there. So with the idea of consciousness as like experience, what happens is that from my perspective, it becomes something that is kind of like, again, it's like this like the sense of self, and like these things that we haven't even talked about at all today.
Yeah.
Which I think could be also like a misleading starting point for thinking about or for understanding consciousness. So maybe consciousness is not something that we need to see as being inside of us, but something that is outside of us, something that we're inside of. Right. So that's sort of like if you think about you could think about like these balls in space which have consciousness inside them, right? But you could also think of space as having consciousness inside it, and you get these densities, just like what you're describing about like the area that is responsible for the face, right? That would be like a place in that space of consciousness. And to me, that idea makes just for a simple human that I makes much more sense, because it also explains how these consciousnesses, right, like have the same agreements. Like why we have language, why we can say this is a glass of water or whatever, right? It because we move through the same field of consciousness where agreements are made because we are all connected, or not we are all connected, but everything is connected, and what is like we or I or whatever is just sort of like a little bit more density here. Just like also the idea with the saltwater bucket, with like it's kind of like
exactly. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the two metaphors that have pervaded humanity so far are about consciousness. I would say there are two. One is, there are three, but I'm gonna just mention two for the sake of your very nice thought. And it's there is stuff, particles, and Big Bang, and then a lot of particles were created, and then particles found a way of organizing itself in a way that created life. And then life evolved from inferior animals to superior, allegedly, animals like us. And then suddenly, in the process of all of that, consciousness popped out. Mm-hmm. And we scientists are baffled about that, and we want to understand how is it possible that a piece of meat can, in the endless, I mean, in the time span of evolution, created sentience or qualitative states. Mm-hmm. That's one worldview. The second worldview is, no, consciousness is all there is. Mm-hmm. There are not two things, there is just one, and that oneness is consciousness. Mm-hmm. And from this vast field of consciousness is that there are more, as you mentioned, little, spirals of high density that we call ourselves, or animals, or flowers, or anything else. And that view has the cause inverted, right? So you have material stuff, and by the mere act of complexity, you end up with conscious beings. But in this other view, is the other way around. You have consciousness as the basis, and individuality and differences as a consequence of that unified thing that we call consciousness. It's a complete opposite view. The thing is, how you can make science out of using the second worldview. I'm not saying that it's impossible. I'm not saying that it's not compatible, but it's much harder, because all the science is created based on the idea of that complexity is incremental, right? And complexity is just a result of simpler things coming together and organizing in more sophisticated ways. So having that paradigm in mind, it's completely obvious to say, yeah, sure, consciousness is just the result of more complicated structural organization of living things. But for the whole Indian tradition, Eastern traditions, that doesn't make any sense. It's the other way around. So I'm not close to the possibility that that's the case. It's just a matter of how can I reconcile that with what I do.
I think even though it seems that the second approach is something that's really hard to kind of like turn into a science. But however, and I know that you are doing this or planning to do this, is you rather than just look at one brain, you look at many brains in a room, let's say, or in and you kind of like see if you can find any effects of synchronization, for lack of a better term, maybe, um, that are sort of like pointing at something like a connective tissue, like a connective force that brings consciousness, right? I think it's not impossible to start looking in that direction, and
it's not.
Yeah. So
yeah, it is not. And the question would be, how could you convince a reviewer that the interpretation that you make out of that is what you're actually thinking of? So my approach to this would be to run the experiment, see what happens, see whether, let's say, if there is a clear prediction about what meditation is, if we're all tapping the same underlying field, then you would be able to see, let's say, that different brains in one room, when they're doing this and they are agreeing in what they're experiencing, create more information out of each individual brain. So there is some commonality, some structure across brains. But a different thing is to claim that effect that I observe across brains is the correlate of, or the demonstration of, a conscious field. There are like 10 steps between the two things. Of course, but of course you can have the prediction that might be the case, and if you have the hypothesis that that's the case, well, you can make an argument, right? So I would say it's a starting point, but it would be extremely hard to convince any of my colleagues that that's the case, even to convince myself, even though I could believe that.
But like we've talked about music in the other conversation we had, right? And the aspect of listening as in perceiving, right? Not necessarily just via music, but also just two people sitting next to each other. There is some sort of like, even if we don't open our mouth, there is perception, and on that level, we don't need to have to call it consciousness, really. But if we kind of like have some more understanding that there is this like non-verbal or whatever communication, or not even directed to each other communication, that kind of like happens if you share the same space somehow.
Yes.
I think that, and I'm not talking about like crazy ESP experiments or anything.
No, I agree.
Like you can have, like, say you have your experimental design with, say, some visual priming thing again, and you just try to see, okay, because like in social psychology, we know, or people know, that the setting has a huge influence on the results. We know that as, like, so, but kind of like, what kind of different effects would you get if you measure two brains sitting next to each other at the same time doing the same task?
Yeah.
For example, I think yes, there may be some really interesting potential there for understanding.
Yes. Yeah, and there are people doing this, like Guillaume Dumas, a colleague in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
He was, I would say, the pioneer in doing brain-to-brain analysis to understand how different brains can influence each other based on different contexts, or just by the mere fact of interacting. I think that's great. And theoretically speaking, there is this whole idea that the context, it's influencing the parts. So the global patterns can actually have an effect on the elements that generate that pattern. That philosophers call that submergence, which is the opposite of emergence, mm-hmm, like an emerging property.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have patterns that are more than the sum of the parts, the idea of a submergent state is that the wholeness, which is more than the sum of the part, is capable of exerting causal influences on the elements that are generating the pattern.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's like circular causality. And we know that in physics, for instance, there are plenty of examples where submergence actually exists, or you can make a good case for it. And why would it be the case for groups of people, right? Like in a concert, like this, the atmosphere of the gig is clearly influencing, which is more than the sum of the part, is clearly influencing each of the individuals in such a way that they end up like having a good time or getting into the same mood, communicating things that are nonverbal, like you say.
Mm-hmm.
So that I would say that's another great area of research that the 21st century is waiting for.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So, I mean, thank you for what you do and your research, and I wish you a very long life with lots of wonderful findings.
Yes.
and
Thank you.
and yeah. Thanks for.
So thank you for having me. Let's plan in the future. We for those who don't know, we are planning a very interesting thing with Marcus, with his brain and a colleague's brain. So possibly in the future, if we chat in a year or so, we can actually show people how your brain is speaking to other brains.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Andres.
Okay,
I'll
Marcus.
stop recording.